many books do you have? 2? No.
Huh?
She talked. We're on the high mic.
Well, good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. I'm Dean Wolf, the rector of the parish, and I'm stepping in for Peter Thompson this morning. It's my joy to welcome you to the forum, where each week we explore important issues at the intersection of faith and the modern world. This weekend, Memorial Day weekend, is often considered the unofficial start of summer, so we thought it might be nice to turn to the summer and get prepared for the reading that many of us hope to do during that more leisurely time. And to help us do that, we're excited to welcome back to the forum 2 subject matter experts. Frank Calarius and Crystal Chen are both librarians at the New York Public Library. Frank is the manager of the Jefferson Market Library in Greenwich Village, and Crystal is the young adult librarian at the Woodstock branch in the Bronx. And together, they are co-hosts of the popular New York Public Library podcast, The Librarian is In. Frank and Crystal, it's great to have you back here at St. Bart's.
Thank you.
So, this has been a difficult week after a couple difficult years, pandemic years. What are some of the summer reading recommendations which might lift our spirits in this time?
Well, I'll go first. Age before beauty. I'm not exactly a lift your spirits kind of reader, but I like to read books about the big questions. So actually, when you said intersection of faith in our modern world, I was like, I think I read something about that just by coincidence, and I really just talk about the books on the podcast and in life about what I'm just currently obsessed with. I didn't try to organize a summer preview of all the new books that are coming out.
Sure.
Since the pandemic, I've also focused so much on classics, like all the writers I hadn't read before. I just wanted to go backwards for some reason. So, and one of my favorite subjects in that area is retelling of Greek myths. It occurs to me last year when we did this, I discussed a book called The Sacred Band, which is about a faction of a Greek military group. So I seem to be the Greek guy, even though my name is Calarius, but it's not Greek, it's actually German. But I am obsessed with Greek myths and the retelling of them. And recently, a book called Cersei by Madeline Miller was a big success. And it's the retelling of the Cersei myth. And that sort of, I think, brought about a little bit of a resurgence. And when it's summer reading, it was the last book I read on a beach, which is about 3 years ago now, because I haven't traveled since then. And a friend of mine and I, who went on this trip with me, we read the book to each other, Cersei by Madeline Miller. And Cersei is a sort of goddess who has interesting parents and who is also, as they say, unattractive or whatever. I mean, whatever that's code for in Greek myths. But a girl, I guess, who is not in society, is sort of an outsider. And she falls in love with this guy, a fisherman named Glaucus, and she wants to make him a god so she can sort of be in love with her. They can be in love with each other because she's sort of this sort of semi-goddess. But she does what she does. She mixes herbs and potions and stuff. She's sort of known for this sort of connection to the land and to animals, and she turns him into a god. He does, but then when he becomes this godlike figure, he rejects her and goes to a woman named Scylla. Now, Cersei is furious at this and then turns Scylla into a 6-headed monster. Scylla and Charybdis, do you know that myth? Anyway, so she, and then because she does that, she feels really guilty, but then Zeus says, you're a little bit too much. Your witchcraft is a little crazy, and you're making us nervous, so we're going to banish you to an island. So she gets banished to an island, and that really starts off her adventures. And she runs into, most famously, Odysseus. Cersei appears for 16 lines in the Odyssey. And so her adventures really begin then. And one of the things she does, which she's famous for, is that a lot of the sailors that float by the island and come to the island for like something to eat and like, rest for a minute. And Cersei's very happy to have them. They're not so nice to her, and she then turns them into pigs. So that's her thing. She turns men into pigs, which you can extrapolate a metaphor from there that might apply to the modern world as well. So that was Cersei by Madeline Miller. And then one book I read recently, which you might know, and I've never read C.S. Lewis before. And I did read Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Did you read that?
No.
I read it as a kid, and I really, as a kid, was like, I'm more of a Wrinkle in Time kind of guy. I was like, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, I didn't quite understand it, but Wrinkle in Time I loved, Madeline L'Engle. So, I know C.S. Lewis is famous for a midlife conversion to Christianity, and he's written a lot about that, but I don't know a lot about him. But I discovered he wrote this book called Till We Have Faces, which is a retelling of the Cupid and Psyche myth. And I was like, have I not heard of this? Because I love reading these books on the retelling of Greek myths. And so the Cupid and Psyche myth is, again, a king with 3 daughters, the youngest of which is Psyche, and she's very beautiful and very loving and very kind, and so gorgeous and beautiful that the populace start worshiping her more than they worship Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love. And she's like, excuse me, but I'm the goddess of love. You're getting a little bit too much attention. And so this girl, but she's also a very good person. She's a very kind person. Aphrodite, as the gods do, I think that's why I was interested in gods and goddesses when I was younger. It was sort of a way to explain life, but I also was fascinated by these 12 Olympians who each have their own zone of expertise, like love, war, jealousy, and they run riot on us, the people. I don't know, something about that appealed. It was some explanation that made sense. So Aphrodite is gonna get her revenge because Psyche's getting too much attention. So she tells her son, Cupid, who is also love, to make Psyche fall in love with the most horrible, vile creature possible, and therefore getting rid of Psyche and punishing her for being so beautiful and adored by the public. So, of course, Cupid gets a load of Psyche and is like, well, I'm in love with her now because she's so amazingly beautiful. So there's a problem. And at the same time, Psyche is so beautiful and adored, but no men really want to marry her because they just want to worship her and they can't really get close to her that way. And so the king, her father, is like, we've got to do something. So he goes to the oracle at Apollo's oracle, and says, is she going to get married? What's going on here? And they say, well, maybe, but what you really got to do is take her to the top of a hill. And this is where the gods are just like, why? Top of a hill, tie her up there, and she's probably going to be greeted by this winged monster who's going to make her his wife and live a horrible life the rest of her life. And the king's like, no, but they do anyway. And he's like sad, and they're all sad. And Psyche's like, I'm a good person, I'm beautiful and good, I'm going to do it for the world, I'll do what I have to do. And she's taken there, and then who comes along but Cupid, takes her away, takes her to a beautiful castle. Just tell me to shut up if I'm talking too long. I feel like I've had 4 cups of coffee. So she's taken to this beautiful palace, and but Cupid says, because he's a god, you can never see me. We are now husband and wife, but you can never see me because you can't. That's just the rule of our relationship. And Psyche's like, strange, but okay. And she's very happy. She's in love with him. They see each other at night. She lives in this great palace, lots of food, music, and all that. And her sisters, now she's the youngest of 3, so her older sisters come to visit her, and they're all married to princes and have castles of their own, but they get a load of Cupid's layout, and they're like, this is incredible, way more than ours. And they get jealous, because there's always that jealousy thing, and the sisters contrive to bring Psyche down, because she's got better than they have. And they basically convince Psyche, you don't see your husband, he's got to be a monster. He's going to kill you one day. He's got to be terrible. You have to see him. So they give her a lamp and a knife, basically, to come in at night and turn the lamp on and see who it is her husband. She does do that, realizes he's incredibly beautiful. The lamp spills oil on Cupid, and he wakes up, flies, rebukes her, and says, you broke our trust. I mean, basically a myth of like, I gave you one rule about my life, and without trust, no love can live. So then Psyche is, pitched into a torrent of misery, and Aphrodite just wants to make it even worse and gives her these trials to get through. So anyway, that's a long way of saying that C.S. Lewis then wrote Till We Have Faces, because he was always fascinated with that myth. And what his fascination was where he wanted to correct it in a way and retell it, is that the sisters, when they come to see Psyche, should not be able to see that house, the palace, because the palace is divine, and they, as non-believers, should not be able to see it. And so also, by not being able to see it, it makes their motives to bring Psyche down a little more ambiguous. And so then Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis is actually told from the point of view of the oldest of those three sisters, Orwell. And she's very unattractive, but very aggressive and very warlike. She becomes queen eventually. But her youngest sister, Psyche, is her devotion, is her love. She sees that Psyche is incredibly good as well as beautiful, and often those two are connected. And so when Psyche is taken by this mystery man, Cupid, she, without seeing the palace, she just sees Psyche in this, forest environment, thinks Psyche's either crazy or there is this guy that's just manipulating her. He's not a god like Psyche says she is. So there's a mistrust there, again with trust. And she says, you gotta see him, and she sets him up with the lamp and the knife to deal with this. And that sets off the motion. So it's really from the older sister's point of view, and you said this sort of, I realized it became this issue of like, what is God, and what are the gods? And also, what is love, in that the whole 3/4 or more of the story is Orwell telling the story of her love for Psyche, and her motherly love for Psyche, and her intense love for Psyche, and her guilt over what she did that forced Psyche into a very struggling existence. But what's interesting, and I'll spoiler slightly, is that she comes to realize, which is, have you read this book?
Mm-hmm.
You have, because it was not hard to understand, but it was a lot there to understand, because then it becomes, through incredibly beautifully written scenes, Orwell realized her love was selfish, was a selfish, self-centered love, was merely a projection of her need to love, rather than to selflessly love another, like Psyche did. And it seems, again, like the big question, such a simple realization. Like we can all say, oh, I wasn't selfless enough, I should have loved more. Easy to say, not so easy to do, and then C.S. Lewis writes this journey so incredibly well. And there's other characters that Orwell destroys because of her selfish love. A military guy who's like her head general when she becomes queen, have a great relationship with him, and he's just devoted to her as a servant to the queen, but she just works him to death in the name of love. She thinks, well, you are my general, so you have to protect the country, but I love you because you are so good at it. And then she has a scene with his wife after he dies that says, basically, you destroyed him, you killed him. Of course he wouldn't complain to the queen. You killed him with your basically projection of what you needed to be in this running this country. I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was a really great takeoff of a myth told from a minor character who looks very selfish, purely selfish in the myth itself, and then you really drill down deep and dig into this personality with great psychological intensity. So, what time is it? I mean, I have other books, but like quickly, like Ted Hughes did a book called Tales from Ovid. Ted Hughes is famously and maybe scandalously Sylvia Plath's husband, who's a British poet. But he is probably, to me, the best translator of Greek and Roman work. His version of Antigone, or Oedipus, is incredible. And you can see, I was going to read from them, but... And then one other book, Anne Carson wrote Autobiography of Red, a romance, which is a novel in verse, but it's free verse and it's not rhyming verse, so it's really much a novel in a sort of poetic form. And that's, again, taking a myth and retelling it from the perspective of a unexpected character. This Autobiography of Red is basically the myth of Hercules, who by accident killed his wife and kids, but that's another story. I mean, Hera was being jealous, and she's always the jealous queen. But Hercules, because of his guilt over this, goes through his labors to atone for this particular sin. And one of his labors is to go to this island and kill this monster, Geryon, and take the infamous red cattle. And that's one of his labors he has to do. And of course, it's like, you can never get past the monster Geryon, but of course Hercules does. And what Autobiography of Red is retelling the myth through Hercules and Geryon are two teenage boys. And Geryon, feels like a monster. Like, what teenager among us, when we were teenagers, didn't quite feel like a monster maybe when we were in high school. But he actually does have red wings, maybe. And Hercules, who's also known as Heracles, comes to town, and he's this big, all emotion, no intellect, just a lot of testosterone happening. And Geryon is a very thoughtful, nerdy, shy guy. And it's this relationship between what is a hero and what is a monster, as two teenage boys in Canada. Loved it. Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson. So I guess that's enough for me. How you doing?
I mean, it's funny that you speak of teenagers that are monsters, because I do have a book that refers to that.
Crystal, if you can get your microphone closer, it's going to...
Maybe I'll have to hold it, because I feel like
maybe you should stick it in the mask.
That feels weird. It feels really intimate. I'll hold it and try to be better about it. But my recall is not nearly as good as Frank's. My memory is terrible. In fact, prior to coming here, Chelsea, who is one of the parishioners here and who sings in the choir, she would text me every single day just so I wouldn't forget that I had this morning meeting. I made it, so it worked. So the first book I wanted to talk about briefly was one that we had just discussed in our last episode, which is going to come out in a couple of weeks, right? And it is Light from Uncommon Stars by Reiko Aoki, right? And that book it's an adult book, but it has a lot of young adult themes in it, which is why I loved it, of course. And it features a young woman named Katrina who runs away from home and then links up with this violinist or a violin teacher named Shizuka. But what she doesn't know about Shizuka is that she is known as the Queen of Hell, and she is somebody who has sold or made a deal to deliver 7 souls to hell, and she has 7 years apiece for each soul, and she's done 6. And with each of those souls, they have made a contract. I feel weird talking about this here, but they've made a contract where it's like, if in exchange for fame, riches, or just being these like world-renowned violin players, they would be willing to go to hell for that. And Katrina is somebody who is playing the violin, who has this kind of ability that Shizuka sees and wants to be the 7th soul, and she only has a year to do this. Katrina is also a transgender woman who is running away from home because she's clearly not accepted by her father, who's abusive, also her mother, who stays with the father and doesn't really listen to her. And then there's all this other stuff happens. There's a demon there. There's a whole sci-fi. If you look at the book cover, it is of a night sky with a shooting spaceship. And there's another side story with a donut shop owner named Lon and her AI child Shirley and her other children who have come across the galaxy to watch was essentially the end plague happened, and the donut shop is located on Earth, which will just miss all of the terrible destruction, and they wanted to start this tourist attraction there. But it's also this like really complicated and interesting, I think, metaphor for like the refugee experience, which I love. So the reason why I like recommend this book is that there's so much about it in Katrina, who is this young person who's just trying to find their way to find love and acceptance that I think is really resonant with a lot of people. I also think that this book is a very parental story. Like Shizuka and Katrina, Shizuka kind of learns to really love Katrina, Lan, and her AI child, Shirley. There's a lot about these parents, mothers especially, who are learning to let go of their children, learning to let them have their own personal autonomy, feeling a lot of fear in that process, but recognizing that they've done a lot of terrible things and they want their child to have this like better future. And I feel like for that reason, like for young people, for older people with children, like this is such a great book. And I think like it gives me all the feels. The second book, I think, is the complete opposite of that. It's called Paradise by Fernanda Melchor, and I think it was longlisted for the Booker International like Translation Prize. This is the one about the two teenage boys who are, I think, in some ways monsters. They are kind of their own personal desires sort of overwhelm them and take control of their lives in such a way that they embark on a crime, and in the course of that, like everything goes out of control. Horrible things happen. It's extremely violent. I would say like content warnings all over the place. It's very short. I think it's pretty propulsive. Like when you start reading, it's hard to stop, but it's also just like really terrible and terrifying. And I think it shows you the deepest and most horrible parts of humanity, which is such like the opposite from like Clay from
Summer reading. There you go.
I feel like this is not a book for everyone, but I think there is an audience for this book, and if that audience is you, it's here for you to take, because I don't want it on my shelves anymore. It kind of scares me. And then the
quite a sell of that book.
I mean, it was a good book. It was really well written, and I think it does some interesting things, and it's a pretty thrilling book. I think you just have to have the stomach for it, and I don't think I have the stomach for it.
Really?
Oh, Frank is like, yes, I have the stomach for it. And then the last one I wanted to quickly talk about is there's a publication of Toni Morrison's short story called, and I'm going to try to pronounce it correctly, Recitative. It's her only short story. It was published this year with this like really beautiful introduction by Zadie Smith. Again, a very short book. I highly recommend it. In the short story, and this is all kind of talked about by Zadie Smith in the introduction, it follows two girls, I think from childhood to adulthood a little bit, and throughout the book, and the short story is very experimental, throughout the book you are never told which girl is white and which girl is black, and that's done purposely. And it's done in such an interesting way because when you read it, I think you're constantly going in and out of your own sort of biases of like what you expect a black child to be, what you expect a white child to be. And I think it turns you on your head in some ways because it never reveals that for you, and you're always constantly questioning that. And I think questioning like maybe like the societal constructs of race through that book. And I love that, especially with the Zadie Smith introduction. I don't think I would have gotten nearly as much out of that short story if it were not for Smith's writing as well. But that's my 3 books. Yeah.
We invite your questions for Frank and Crystal, and to submit them, you can use the live chat function on YouTube, the comments function on Facebook, or you can email Manny Rodriguez-Leach at mrodriguez@stbarts.org. And if you're in the room, you can use a comment card found on the center table and hand your cards in to us so we can use them.
They tell them about these books.
Is it harder to be a librarian for youth in the current culture wars?
Well, I'm not a librarian for youth anymore.
She's a coordinator of young adult services, but you were.
I was, yes, for a long time. Now I work in like sort of the education departments. Yeah, it is really challenging. I think there's a lot of book bans that are happening, those kinds of challenges of books that I've read and I think are amazing and really life-affirming for young people. It's wild, I guess is all I can say, you know? These books are really important, and what I do appreciate is that it seems like every time one of those books get challenged, they shoot to the top of the bestseller list. So I'm glad about that.
Do you feel challenges in New York, though? I mean, like book challenge, because I have a friend who's moved to Idaho,
Right.
and she's a librarian there, and she's told me that it's truly, truly a situation she's never seen before, where people are actually wanting books out of the library badly, like activizing to get them out.
I feel like we're a little more protected here. I feel very lucky to have sort of the colleagues I do at NYPL, the book ops team, like they're very, very supportive, and I've worked on committees like nationally with other librarians throughout like the Midwest, South, etc. And I don't think it's the same for them. Oftentimes it's just like one library in a small town, and they may be the only advocate for these books, and we are much stronger in that sense because there's a lot of us and we're all like, no, we need to keep these books here,
So I'm told that you guys like to play a game where I read a quote and see if you can identify this. This is probably a book I have loved, but that this may not really stump the panel here. But let's see if I can.
Don't overestimate us. We love it because we love hearing people read too, but it's also fun.
I don't think I've ever gotten this right, so.
So here's a quote.
Okay.
Never again would he walk Nevsky Prospect, however they choose to rename it, without feeling an unbearable sense of loss. And that's just how it should be. That sense of loss is exactly what we must anticipate, prepare for, and cherish to the last of our days, for it is only our heartbreak that finally refutes all that is ephemeral in love.
What was the first sentence again?
Never again would he walk Nevsky Prospect.
Nevsky Prospect? So that's a place, obviously. Obviously, I don't know it. Right?
Is it in New York?
It's got to be does anyone know? What? Oh, it's in St. Petersburg. I meant know the book. So is it Russian? The book?
Well,
is it a Russian?
That's a good hint.
It's not Anna Karenina, is it?
Well, it's funny because one of the books I was going to talk about today was Anna Karenina, about reading Anna Karenina, because I just read that, Tolstoy.
So this is A Gentleman in Moscow.
Amor Tells.
Which I loved because it's really the story about a very good person, and how that goodness gets revealed over the course of a life.
Oh, that book is so popular. Actually, he lives in the Village, and he gave me an autographed copy of that book, and I haven't read it yet.
Well,
but now I have to. But the public went wild for it.
Put it on the list.
Oh. Manny, what was yours? Where's Manny?
I'm here in the back.
I want to know your. I want to hear your.
You may immediately get it, but
all right.
So I'm just going to start with. Where did all these stories come from? It seemed that all Rashid had to do was to part his lips in a plump red smile, and out would pop some brand new saga, complete with sorcery, love interest, princesses, wicked uncles, fat aunts, mustachioed gangsters in yellow check pants, fantastic locations, cowards, heroes, fights, and a half a dozen catchy, humble tunes. Everything comes from somewhere, Haroon reasoned, so these stories can't simply come out of thin air.
Huh.
What was the character's name again?
Haroon.
Haroon.
Oh, it's Haroon in the Sea of Stories?
That's it.
Well, that wasn't very hard. How interesting. I've always wanted to read that too. Wow.
Is
that one of your favorites?
It is really one of my favorites. I've got about 211 pages here.
Oh.
And it's a glorious story about, I think he wrote it right after the fatwa was taken out on him.
Yeah.
And that's the reason he wrote it. And it reads like a child's story, a child's fairy tale.
Yeah.
And it's so much more. Let's see.
We may have to have you come up and be on camera, Manny, if you're going to talk for a while.
That's a Salman Rushdie book?
Yeah, it's funny because Peter
Peter,
did
is this
Salman
like a
Rushdie last
Salman
year,
Rushdie
and
book
now
club?
Salman Rushdie is
Yeah.
the same
Dina, I'll
Bart's
just
thing.
take questions. I'm set up.
Sorry,
All the laptop and everything is here.
I couldn't resist
Sorry.
asking him. Apologies.
No, that's good. I'm good. Do you have an all-time favorite book that you, I mean, that's a hard question. That's, choosing among your children, but.
Right. I mean,
Anything that's
I don't believe in like all-time favorites, but it's fun to play, and I usually, when people ask me that, I usually say Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte.
Yeah.
It's just hard, nasty, vicious, ugly. All the things I like to read.
I kind of want to say Cold Comfort Farm as the satire guy punctures that, but I'm going to say American Born Chinese, which is the Jane Lewin Yang graphic novel, which I read as an adult, and I was
So
like, I
good.
really wish I had this when I was a young person. But yeah, it's a great one.
I keep going back to A Prayer for Owen Meany. I just love that. Maybe because I've directed enough Christmas pageants that scene just always, makes me laugh
So
out
good.
loud.
Yeah. Oh, I love that book too. John Irving. So yeah.
So do you think the role of reading has changed in a digitalized culture?
Yes. Actually, one thing I wanted to say, which related to Anna Karenina, because it's 800 pages, and if you haven't read it, who has read it? Anna Karenina. Oh, okay. Are you glad you did? Yeah. It's also great to say, I've done that. Like, I actually did that book. Like, I read it. Like, it's an ego thing. But it's also, like, an incredible book. It's like the original novel. It's got everything you'd want in there. But what I relate to that is, what I realized over the pandemic is that I'm very, Debbie knows, I'm very not against, but I'm very like, about technology. I will never read a book online. I'll never read it on a device. I really don't like the fact that I even have a phone. It's just, it's like I don't like inventions, except penicillin. That's the only one I like. But, and adhesive stamps that you don't have to lick. Those two are my favorite. But, during the pandemic, of course, all of us went online more, and I got slowly sucked into YouTube and obsessed watching Karen videos, and I was just like crazy for a year until I realized it just doesn't feel good. It doesn't make me feel good. You're sort of addicted to it, and you're staring at it, and you click, 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 because it's designed to do that. And then when I started reading Anna Karenina, what I realized is like, it's so simple. Reading a book, not anything with a distraction built into it, like a camera or texting or other things, for like a half an hour a day, I suddenly, like after just 20 minutes, half hour, I felt like emotionally, mentally better. Just the act of like communing with this. And then, because it started because Anna Karenina is so long that I would feel anxious, like I'm never going to finish it, all that stuff. And I just said, calm down, just read for half an hour, and I did, and then I put it, and then it was something I looked forward to every day, and it really just centered me and made me literally feel mentally better. I feel like there's something about devices, there's too much on them. It's the part of their appeal is that it's a camera, it's a texter, it's an email, it's the World Wide Web, it's everything. And I actually realize now I like things, like if I want to watch a movie, I'll watch a movie. If I want to read a book, I'm going to read it, Anyway, but I could go on forever about that. But it really emotionally was like helpful and pulled me out of this like addictive spiral, which is, devices are invented to do.
I think we have some questions from the audience.
Sorry, Crystal, did you want to say something?
No, I think those are all really great points. Yes.
You sure?
Yeah.
So there's a question for you. It says, never thought about an introduction by another author being so key to a book, and they wonder if you can expound a bit on this. Are there others, for example?
I mean, I don't know about like others in terms of the intro in the book, but I do think that there is something about reading two books at at the same time or one right after the other, where they almost start to have this dialogue together. Or if you're like looking at two works of art, right, and maybe by different artists, and they're side by side, and the way they start to speak to each other. And I'll give you the example of that, which is I read American-Born Chinese, and I was also reading Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Mask. And that book was written in like the early 1900s. Jean Yang's book is written in 2006. And even though they are like 50 years to a century apart, they were encountering the same kind of issues of like personal alienation within themselves, and seeing themselves through the gaze of like other people and trying to confront that. And so I loved the experience of being able to read those two together, and I think that really informed my understanding of each. And I feel like the introduction is in the same way with the Zadie Smith and the Toni Morrison, like it just informed my introduction of each person together.
Yeah. Manny, do you have?
We do. From one of our younger parishioners, they're talking about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and they want to know if you've noticed that the lion is similar to Jesus. I read the book before, and the lion gets killed and rose again.
Yeah. I noticed it. But I read it when I was a kid, so the thing about, and like I said, I was much more like, I like Wrinkle in Time better. They're not like the same story, but they're books I read at the same time. So I can't speak authoritatively, but I have, of course, heard about C.S. Lewis's Christian imagery, and I think it
like
obviously is present there. Somebody in the audience could probably talk far better about Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Well, I like this idea of going back, though, and reading books you've read as a child. A lot of us read some great classic literature in high school and in college, kind of usually, under a deadline. And later, when you read those at a different point in your life, they have an entirely different meaning and really strike you. And either you don't like it as much. The Sun Also Rises did not age well with me.
Interesting.
But some other books that I've gone back and reread are enhanced.
Well, I read To Kill a Mockingbird as an adult, and I'm so glad I did. And Wrinkle in Time, you say, I did go back and read it, and I was like, is this like an anti-communist book? Because it was like, each kid in front bouncing the same ball, everyone goes out in the same car, and I was like, what is this message exactly? But still, it's still magical to me.
I want to say that A Wrinkle in Time was the first book I ever stole as a child.
Stole?
Mm-hmm.
From the library?
No, from my teacher.
I'm like, from the library, as if I've never done that.
That's how important that book was to me.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Well, she was a beloved Episcopalian and was, I think, theologian or writer in residence at St. John the Divine.
Yeah.
So.
She used to. A friend of mine who was obsessed with her and Wrinkle in Time went to her office there and just, in the 80s and was like, hi, and she was like, hello. She's very nice. Like, you feel like you could do that back then. It doesn't seem possible now, but.
So, Crystal, is this residual guilt that you're feeling?
Yeah, I feel like I need to announce it to everybody
She's
here.
doing it
for
here,
like
of course.
Some absolution or something, yes.
Well, here you go.
So, the New York Public Library, a lot of people here probably have a card connected. What are we missing, or what do most people not take advantage of as parts of the library system here? Because it's an extraordinary collection, vast, and not just books.
Right.
I mean, I'll say like the research collections are really amazing. Like I had the opportunity to go to the Stephen A. Schwartzman building and like look through these boxes and boxes of puzzles and did like a project about that for a library school. And they were like children's puzzles, like the throwaway sticks, and I don't even know how to describe them. But it was really amazing to see all of that like relia and stuff that is collected. Yeah. And I also think that people forget that we have books, but there's also tons and tons of programs. Like part of my job, what we're doing is we're launching these teen centers. They're gonna get like great like 3D printers, and we've had like 3D printers in the library, and the kids are using using that. Or story times where, you go there for the children, but I also see the network start getting built with the parents, and how they kind of like meet each other. The kids have like all their own friendships and stuff, but there's so much stuff that's happening, and it really feels like a community center. I forget who calls it like the third place, like the first place home, second place work, and I think the library is that third place.
Right.
Yeah.
And how is the library reaching out to the kids? What are they doing to reach your target audience?
You mean like within the library, like
with the programs you were just talking about?
Oh, okay.
What are they doing to reach the kids?
So we have like story times.
What are you doing though?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not a children's librarian, but like.
No, I mean like your young adult role.
Oh, no, what I used to do, I guess, thinking back on like a year ago when my job kind of changed, was like having a lot of different activities available for kids. And I felt like a lot of them, like even if we were doing a crafting activity, this is an opportunity for me to really talk to teens, because I think sometimes like when their hands are kind of busy doing an activity and they're not like making eye contact, they feel a lot more comfortable to like open up and tell you about their lives and what's going on, and then you can offer like a different kind of support.
But to get to them, the children's and young adult librarians like really hustle hard to get in the schools.
Yes.
And when they get in the schools, for young adult especially, is what the kids in the school, they do a presentation and a program in the schools, and what happens, what I've noticed from my experience of watching young adult librarians, is the kids respond mostly to the person, to the crystals. Like they'll be like, all right, I want to actually go to the library after school because something about this girl, this young woman is interesting to me. And then the programs happen. I really found that the young adult librarians are the ones that connect most with the kids as people. And then the programs grow out of that, I think. Because why go to a library after school when you could run wild in the streets or whatever? I mean, it's this connection that's not pressured like school, but yet there's so much there that is sort of enriching. Anyway.
This gives me an opportunity to invite questions from the audience. You can either use the live chat function on YouTube or the comments function on Facebook, or send something to Manny and we'll ask the question. Well, let's see. While we're waiting for questions.
Well, we do have not a question, but a request that you all mention the books that you talked about and the authors, because people are interested in them. So could you just restate them?
Oh. Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson, Cersei by Madeline Miller, Tales from Ovid, Ted Hughes, and Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis.
They did Light from Uncommon Stars by Reiko Aoki. This one, Paradise by Fernanda Melcher. Paradise spelled Paradais. And
Is it Resist? I don't know.
Maybe I'm mispronouncing it.
And so you've got these books here,
yeah.
Making History, The Storytellers Who Shaped the Past, Richard Cohen.
Crystal, because she's in the administration now, has all these books that she brought for free that she hasn't read, I don't think. She literally gave them to give away to anybody who's interested. But I didn't read that one, and she brought her books from her office, I think.
And these.
Just as a gift. So if anybody wants to come up and rummage through and take, that's what they're here for.
Great.
I have a question. How hard is it, and I'm going to assume that it's hard, how hard is it for the two of you to de-access a book?
I'm going through that right now because my library was under renovation and the pandemic and stuff, so it's closed and we're reopening in July, and I have to go through the whole collection to figure out from 2 years ago all the new books combined, so there's like lots and lots and lots. It's really hard. Period. It has to be done. You do realize, like, it's almost like becoming a parent. Like, you realize when you say, I want to be a parent, and you have an idea of it, the reality is so different when you're actually a parent, even though I'm not a parent, so I don't even know. But I'd imagine it would be like when you say, oh yeah, of course we have to get rid of books or weed them, but when you actually have to do it, it's a far different experience.
So the New York Public Library works on literacy and in increasing literacy among our citizens. Are there any programs that people volunteer for to help people with reading, or do you have those kinds of programs at the library?
It's a good question. I mean, a lot of people who want to volunteer usually want to do things like that or read stories to kids, and something that's sort of feels very good to do. But the library has a great staff to do that. I mean, at Jefferson Market, we had English as a second language classes, and it was incredible. Like, people from all over the world. I mean, there was no one zone that was like, oh yeah. It was all over the world. And the teachers are so great, are so excellent, and they are a part of the New York Public Library staff. Volunteers, like, to be honest, like, I just had a volunteer at the library is just like a mom from the neighborhood, and I was like, to be honest, all I need is someone to like actually polish the shelves. It's like, you're not going to read to kids. She's like, I'll do it. I was like, oh, thanks, and she did. I mean, but like, what you really need in a volunteer is sometimes to get down there and, you know, not this sort of like, I'm reading to children, aren't I wonderful, you know, kind of thing. So,
Dean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are over by 5 minutes, so
wow.
you need to get ready.
Well, so thank you so much for coming out on a Sunday morning and sharing some of your suggestions for books to read and talk about your work. We really appreciate it.
Thank
you.
you
So much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.